Hello YouTube. This video summarizes the book No Place to Hide by Glenn Greenwald. Edward Snowden was an expert in cybersecurity at the CIA and later worked as a private contractor for the NSA. He switched jobs over several years and countries in order to collect secret documents to show the injustices committed by the secret agencies. When he decided to go public with it, it turned out to be not so easy. Fighting with the secret agencies is so dangerous that the publication of the documents was only possible with a huge leap of faith from both sides. When he was contacted by Snowden, Glenn Greenwald first thought that Snowden was either a dangerous fanatic or an undercover intelligence agent who wanted to weaken investigative journalism. But Snowden had everything well in hand and sent some documents to Greenwald to verify their authenticity. After the first meeting, a heated discussion developed between the journalists, the editors and their lawyers about how to proceed. Initially, Snowden wanted to have some documents published in the Washington Post, but their team of lawyers was against it because of the threatening consequences. So the newspaper forbade its journalists to meet with Snowden. The Guardian, for whom Greenwald works, also has his own lawyers. They too were concerned and informed the NSA about the planned publication. They were legally obliged to do so. The NSA immediately tried to prevent publication and accused the journalists of not working seriously. In the end, it was only the courage of Snowden, Greenwald and the Guardian's editors that led to the documents being published after all, and the world learning what was going on behind the scenes, and unfortunately still going on. When Greenwald was first contacted by Snowden in 2012, Snowden insisted that all emails and documents were exchanged only in encrypted form. Only then Snowden was ready to exchange further information. At the meetings with Greenwald, he made sure that the batteries were removed from all cell phones or that the phones were kept in the refrigerator, because the secret agencies are able to turn on the phones and use them as bugs to listen in on conversations and take recordings. So he was aware of the danger he was walking into. And indeed, the secret agencies began pursuing him when they learned that documents had been leaked. Although Snowden is very careful not to get caught, he never left any doubt that it was he who stole the documents and passed them on to the journalists. On the one hand, he knew that the secret agencies would soon suspect him anyway. On the other hand, he wanted to prevent someone else from being falsely accused. For Snowden, the internet is an extension of our personality. We use it to express ourselves, to communicate, to make friends, and to form opinions. Since surveillance changes our behavior in this space, it strongly interferes with our personal rights to freedom of expression. Snowden is certain that the internet is not being monitored to expose terrorists, but so that we can all behave in an obedient and appropriate manner and not incite political anger. To defend our right to privacy and freedom of expression, Snowden has given up his own life. He had to say goodbye to a well-paid job, his girlfriend and his family, and maybe forever. When Greenwald was first contacted by Snowden in 2012, the National Security Agency, short NSA, is an intelligence agency that collects information for the USA in the name of Homeland Security and the fight against terrorism. This information consists of different types of data. First of all, the NSA receives metadata about all telephone conversations of all US citizens. A secret court has given them permission to do this. Since then, for example, they have received all metadata from the largest telephone company in the USA, Verizon. Metadata is not the conversations themselves, but information about who called whom when and how long the conversation lasted. At first glance, we might think that this is not particularly sensitive data, but even it allows us to draw conclusions. If someone calls their health office first, then their health insurance company, and then a clinic, then you have already obtained important personal data about that person's health. And this data should be nobody's business. Moreover, the NSA has access to vast amounts of data from the internet. In a program called PRISM, the largest technology companies are developing ways to make data available to the NSA. Facebook and Google let the NSA see the metadata and content of private messages, and Microsoft forwards all Skype calls to the NSA. In theory, US citizens are legally protected from such spying, but this right does not apply to citizens of other nations or conversations between Americans and foreigners. In this way, millions of ordinary people who have nothing to do with terrorism are spied on every day. It is difficult to imagine such abstract surveillance. But if instead we just imagine that our boss could read all our chat messages, we get an idea of what is going on. But the NSA is not only notorious for spying on innocent citizens. It also spies on other governments and organizations, and does so much more extensively than is necessary for homeland security or the fight against terrorism. Among other things, NSA is active in the United Nations. They know what the UN Secretary-General is working on at the moment, and they know how countries want to act in future votes. They can then persuade them accordingly to vote in the interests of American concerns. The NSA also focuses on Latin America. They have listened to the talks of the Brazilian President Rousseff and analyzed the text messages of the Mexican President Nieto. Brazil and Mexico are countries with oil reserves and great influence in the region. It is unlikely that the NSA is spying on them to fight terrorism. The NSA is also active in Germany. The information is secured that it had access to the Chancellor's mobile phone, and possibly still has. Although the NSA denies that it is engaged in industrial espionage, some of the published documents clearly indicate this. For example, there is a memo in which NSA staff members discuss how best to obtain information about the trading activities and energy production of friendly countries. Another document contains a joint list drawn up by the NSA and the British Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, which lists foreign companies that are already the target of espionage, including the Brazilian oil company Petrobras. Such activities are difficult to explain in terms of homeland security or counterterrorism. In the 1970s there were revelations about the extent of the work of the intelligence agencies. Thereupon the Senate decided with a task force to end the abuse of power. So how could it happen that the situation got even worse? In 1978 a court was set up which must be consulted if the NSA wants to have new powers. But this court, called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA for short, is unfortunately not a real court. It meets in secrecy, and the only party represented is the government. In real courts there are always two parties attending the hearings. Until 2002, this court did not reject a single NSA application. And since then, only 11 of over 20,000 applications have been denied. On the other hand, the case with Verizon, which we have already seen, was also approved, the release of metadata for all telephone calls to and within the USA. The NSA is also lying to the US Congress. The senators have already asked the NSA several times how many citizens are being spied on by telephone calls and emails. The NSA has always replied that no statistics are available. A leaked document proves the opposite and gives a precise breakdown of when and how many communications were tapped and read. In 2013, 3 billion American emails and phone calls were spied on, and over 200 billion worldwide per month. Although there is only a shallow separation of state powers in the USA and it seems as if the intelligence agencies are being kept under control, this is all just a facade. In fact, the NSA has almost unrestricted freedom of action and is in no way democratically controlled. There is a group of 5 countries, the Five Eyes, which not only share the English language, but also work together to monitor all communication of all people, the USA, England, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These 5 allies are close to monitoring the whole world. In doing so, they will not shy away from any kind of action. The NSA, for example, intercepts packets of routers and servers from the mail, installs spy hardware or software in them and sends them on as if nothing had happened. The English Tempora program has taken on the deep-sea cables. They are now fully monitored and all data being transported under the oceans is intercepted. GCHQ, the British Intelligence and Security Service, has also shared a technology for obtaining data from telecommunications satellites with the other 4 countries. So what can we do to keep our data secret? Should we just encrypt it? Unfortunately, that is not enough, because the intercepted data is by no means just information that is carelessly sent unencrypted. In a project called Bullen, the NSA and GCHQ are developing techniques to crack the encryption of online banking and medical data. So even if we try to protect our data in this way, it is by no means safe from the intelligence agencies. Most of the documents that prove this cooperation contain a code that indicates that the information contained is only intended for these 5 countries. They meet at an annual conference and continue to work on getting truly all the data in the world under their control. Today they are not far away from reaching this goal. The right on privacy has always played an important role in the culture of the USA and is also guaranteed by the Constitution. In the meantime, however, it is increasingly being undermined by the reference to the fight against terrorism. Shortly after 9/11, George W. Bush passed the Patriot Act, which gave the intelligence agencies, among others, more freedom to act. Since then, they no longer have to show well-founded suspicion if they want to inspect sensitive data, such as medical records or bank transactions. They can now simply access such documents without restriction. When Obama came to power, he promised the most transparent administration ever, but the leaked documents speak a different language. Too much is happening behind closed doors and without control by the public or democratic institutions. Some judges even believe that the work of the intelligence agencies now invades privacy to such an extent that it is unconstitutional. The government justifies the extensive surveillance of citizens with the fight against terror, but unfortunately this explanation is hardly sufficient in reality. In fact, between 2006 and 2009, the new authorities from the Patriot Act were applied in 1618 cases of drug-related crime, 112 cases of fraud, but only in 15 cases with suspected terrorist motives. It is difficult to prove, but according to the opinions of many judges, think tanks and other organizations, the collecting of data since September 11 has not prevented a single terrorist attack. Neither the attacks in London or Madrid nor the attack at the 2012 Boston Marathon could be averted by them. So we have to ask ourselves whether this level of surveillance justifies the enormous loss of privacy that goes with it. It is obvious that television channels and newspapers have a political bias. And that is a good thing, because in this way they reflect the natural diversity of opinion in a democracy. But the extent to which the American media are in bondage to the government is close to brainwashing. Before they release any leaked documents, the US media are obliged to report this to the government. In 2004, for example, 2 New York Times reporters received a document proving that the government under George W. Bush had authorized the wiretapping of thousands of innocent Americans. The report was withheld until after next year's election. In general, the American media is government-friendly. They sugarcoat stories about government mistakes, and report on documents leaked to them by the government itself. Sometimes a certain choice of words is enough to steer readers' and viewers' opinions in a certain course. For example, most newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, avoid the word torture when reporting on the questioning practices in the Bush era. Often relevant information is simply concealed. In 2005, when it came to light that the CIA was operating secret prisons where human rights were being violated, the Washington Post reported on it, but it did not disclose the names of the countries and places where these prisons were located. In order to prevent critical voices from being heard, precise procedures are often shortened and presented inaccurately, for example on drone attacks in Pakistan or the assassination of Osama bin Laden. These are just some of the approaches that are being used to create a positive image among the citizens regarding the actions of the government and the intelligence agencies. The United States are currently far away from the healthy spectrum of different, critical opinions that is characteristic for a free press in a free country. When WikiLeaks began publishing secret documents in 2010, the reporting was surprisingly not so focused on the documents themselves, but on the person Julian Assange. We all know his face, and perhaps we remember that he took refuge in an embassy in London, but who remembers what was published? It's an old and successful trick of the media to distract from unpleasant publications. Instead of reporting on the uncovered facts, the media shoot themselves at the whistleblowers and journalists, presenting them as freaks and not to be taken seriously. After the first NSA documents were published, Snowden was portrayed as an insignificant and narcissistic IT helper, and Greenwald was labeled a blogger or activist, not a journalist. This choice of words is important because journalists are protected by certain rights, but activists and bloggers are not. As I said, the trick is quite old. But it never seems to be outdated. As early as 1971, when Daniel Ellsberg discovered that Americans had been deceived about key aspects of the Vietnam War, investigators broke into his psychotherapist's office shortly afterwards, in the hope of finding evidence of dirty secrets from his sex life. In the USA, anyone who publishes secret documents must expect to be considered persona non grata in public forever. It is therefore quite possible that there are many potential whistleblowers who, for fear of public exposure, refrain from informing us about the injustices that continue to take place behind closed doors. The revelations of Edward Snowden prove that the intelligence agencies of the USA and its befriended nations are monitoring most of the people on this planet. There is no effective democratic control over the secret services. That was the summary of the book No Place to Hide by Glenn Greenwald. If you think that the book was exciting and would like to support the author, please buy a copy of the book in the store near you. Thank you for watching and see you the next time.